All right, it's been captivating us for years. Well, and for me, even decades, talking about the Kee Bird, the B-29 bomber that went down after World War II, 1947, and they tried to recover it in 1994 and 1995. We all know what happens. But we got questions. I had questions. And for decades, there really haven't been answers. I'm going to fire up the comments here because apparently you guys have had the same kind of frustration that I have. It's a fascinating story. It just hits from all different directions. But when something like that happens, you only have so much that you can put in an hour-long documentary. Well, hell, 50 minutes. So it just leaves all kinds of questions. I have questions. Apparently, you guys have been on here. Mark Billett got on, geez, 2.5 hours ago. McQuay's 7447, it's been on. So if you guys got questions, throw them in the comments. Let me know what you're wondering about. But I'm gonna jump right in. And like I was saying a few moments ago, this plane has been driving us nuts, and the expedition to try and fly it out of northern Greenland has been driving us nuts. So I took some questions that have been emailed to me, ken@historyxchannel.com, questions and comments that have been thrown on the YouTube channel. And so we're going to try and hit as many of those as we can in the next hour. All right. The first one that I wanted to mention to you guys, or bring this up, this is a great name, beardedmuscle.com. That one's hilarious. Oh, wait, let me get sorry, man, I'm cutting off part of your question. Did anyone go up to the site prior to the 1993 expedition, even just a flyover, to check that it was intact? The short answer is yes. A ton of people went up. I shouldn't say a ton, but several people went up there. Some of it's covered in Carl Hoffman's book, Hunting Warbirds. So this is how I'm going to answer your question. There was a guy. Shoot, let me pull the comments down so you can see his name. So there was a guy, Giles Kershaw. I think it's Giles Kershaw. He was an incredible cold weather pilot, and he did a lot of South Pole flying as well as some North Pole flying as well. And in one of his contracts, he had an opportunity to fly over the Kee Bird site in this plane here. Oh, see, my picture's in the way again. Hold on a second. So this is a special, one-of-a-kind DC-3. DC-3 C-47 from World War II typically has 2 engines, right? Well, not this one. 3 turbine engines, 1 on each wing, and of course the third in the nose. And he flew this, part of the Maritime Patrol and Rescue. And he was flying this northern Greenland, and he took an opportunity to fly over the Kee Bird site. And he snapped, I think 3 iconic photos that were later published, this being one of them. And this was in April in 1985. So to answer this question here, did anyone go up to the site prior to the expedition? Giles Kershaw was the first, probably prominent, because he had some really cool photos that were published, including this one. And we've seen this before. This was in the British documentary Treasure on the Humboldt Glacier, which I've been doing the reviews of. There's going to be part 3 coming up pretty soon, as well as, of course, the documentary that we all are familiar with. Nova put it out in 1996, B29 Frozen in Time. So this image appeared in both of those documentaries, and this was taken by Giles Kershaw. He landed this DC-3, one-of-a-kind modified DC-3, at the site. And so it wasn't just a flyover. He landed and he got some incredible images. This being one of them. Another one right here, side view. When I first saw these pictures, I'm going, oh, well, this must have been part of Daryl Greenemeyer's expedition. But no, take a look. This is when Daryl was up there in 1993 with, his dad. You have Gary Larkins right here, Rick Kriege in the background, just to see, they put it up on the landing gear just to see if the Kee Bird was salvageable. And you can see here, no snow at all. So these images were taken, and here's another one right here from inside the Kee Bird, the flight deck, snow everywhere. And these images were published they were taken in 1985. They were published in 1987. So the word started to get out. So that was Giles Kershaw. I'm going to pull his picture up here one more time. So this guy, an amazing guy, he died in 1990, believe it or not, flying a mission, I believe, in the Antarctic, South Pole. Check me on that. I'm not 100% sure, but this guy has an amazing story. So he was one of the first notable people to visit the Kee Bird. Okay, moving on. Then there was a guy by the name of Bob Ellis. And Bob Ellis, he was involved with an aviation museum out of Michigan. And it's actually covered here in the book. I'm going to open this up real quick. So Bob Ellis had a notion that he was going to go up to the Kee Bird site. Well, he did go up to the Kee Bird site. I apologize. And he spent about 8 hours up there. He actually took a fiber optic borescope and he checked out many of the cylinders on each of the engines. And he said they were just absolutely pristine. So he said, this plane can be flown out of there. But he had the idea. He was going to actually build some kind of tent, some kind of structure over the whole bomber. And that was his plan. And he figured it was going to cost about $500,000. At that particular time, and this was in 1989. Yeah, 1989. So a couple of years after Giles' images were published, Bob Ellis went up there and he had this plan. Two things got in the way. Well, one, the cost. The cost was just way too high. And then two, he couldn't get a permit. At the time, while the U.S. Air Force had relinquished any kind of claims on the Kee Bird, the Danish government was still figuring out, well, what do we want to do with this thing? So he couldn't get a permit. And going back to the whole money thing, it's like, all right, we're just going to let this slide. You know what? Hold on a second here. So Word and Entertainment. I think you meant to say Kalamazoo Air Zoo was actually interested in the Kee Bird. And I think Bob Ellis was that trip, that exploratory trip that he went up to the Kee Bird to see if it was a viable plane to fly out of there, was in conjunction with the Kalamazoo Air Zoo. Because it was a museum out of Michigan. So great comment there. Keep them coming. So Bob Ellis was there. He checked it out. The next person that I want to mention was, this is kind of a crazy story. This is also in Carl's book. So also in 1989, there was a guy, and I don't have a picture for him, okay, but also on the list of people that had visited the Kee Bird before Daryl Greenemeyer, there was a guy by the name of William Schnace, Schnace, and he was a retired Air Force major. He had the idea of contacting a Kee Bird crew member, and I'm going to take my picture out of here again, or my image out of here. He had the idea of contacting this guy. This guy was the flight engineer. So you've got Arnett here, the pilot, Russell Jordan here, the co-pilot. But then this guy, he had the nickname of Lucky, but his last name was Ludke, and he was the flight engineer. Anyway, so this guy, William Schnace, had the idea of working with the flight engineer. Let's go up there and see what we can do to get this plane out of there. And just like with Ellis, Schnace was, he was ready to go. He had all kinds of gear lined up, but he was waiting on a permit from the Danish government and it never came. So he informed them, kind of arrogant. He informed them, oh, well, I'm going to go up there anyway. And the Danish government faxed him. It's like, you do not have permission to go on Danish soil in Greenland to recover this plane or to even check it out, I think. And then the weirdest thing happened. So the guy, Ludke, the flight engineer right here, months after that, he never heard from this guy again. The guy totally disappeared. He was like wiped off the planet. No one's ever heard from him since. His name again, William Schnace. He's mentioned on page 55 of Carl Hoffman's book. So that's kind of a crazy story right there. And then after that, of course, if any of you guys have been watching my previous videos, you've heard me talk about this guy right here, Gary Larkins. And I've traded emails with him in the past. Gary Larkins, a renowned warbird recovery expert. Another picture of him right here. He became familiar with the Kee Bird after seeing the photos that were published by Giles Kershaw. Might have even been way before that, because Gary Larkins knew about every warbird wreck. So anyway, Gary started to do some investigating. He started to petition the Danish government for permits, for permission to go up there. And he actually did a flyover. I think it might have been in a C-130 with possibly the Vermont Air National Guard. They said, sure, we'll fly over. And they got down really low. They did not land, but they did a flyover. And Gary said, yeah, looks good to me. Let's get a closer look. And that's when the 1993 expedition occurred. So to answer, and let me back up, to answer beardedmuscle.com, did anyone go up to the site prior to the expedition? Yeah, plenty of people went up there. There were even people that tried to get there and they couldn't make it. But plenty of people went up there. But Daryl Greenemeyer is the one that, well, got there first, if you want to put it that way. So I hope that answers that question. Let me, I'm going to move on to the next one. Let's see. Actually, I want to check out, hold on a second. I want to pull your comments back up here because you guys are throwing some, okay. Oh, wow. You guys have, I'm sorry. I missed some of these. Let's see. All right, Dominic Me, any interviews of the people that was there? Yes, I've talked to plenty of people. Starting off, Bob Vanderveen, Vernon Rich. Vernon was the guy that had to let all the propane out of the tire. Matt Jackson, who was there for the second season. I talked to Weegee Smith, who was part of the Daryl's original group. Weegee Smith is right here. Talked to him. I talked to Roger Von Grote, the pilot of the Caribou. I've talked to John Cater, who was there for the last season. He was the radial engine expert. I have traded letters with Thad Doolin, who was the flight engineer from the Commemorative Air Force that was part of it. I know I'm forgetting somebody. Traded emails with Gary Larkins, who is, this is Gary right here. So he was up there with Daryl, but he got forced out by Daryl, so he was not part of the final expedition. But I've been in communication with a lot of people that were there. And then there's this Bob Vanderveen, who was the guy that was recovering the fabric on the rudder and all the control surfaces, sent me a box of all kinds of stuff from, you know, his stuff from the Kee Bird, including this, which was very nice of him. A photo of the Kee Bird. To Ken, thanks for your fine videos. You help get the truth out. Definitely want to have Bob on at some point so you guys can ask him all kinds of questions. Anyway, it's been an amazing process to get in touch with all these people, tracking them down. Oh, I should mention, I've talked to Carl Hoffman, the author of Hunting Warbirds. He was fascinating. I've talked to Lawrence Dodd, the cameraman, one of the cameramen from the Nova crew, Albert Bailey, the sound engineer, Mike Rossiter, the director and producer from the Nova crew. I also talked to Paula Apsell, who was well, I think she was in charge of Nova at the time. So Paula, fascinating woman. So I've had an opportunity to talk to all kinds of different people about this Kee Bird adventure. And as long as you guys are interested, I am going to get it out there because, I even talk, this is heartbreaking. So obviously can't talk to Rick Kriege, right? He died. But I talked to his daughter, Haley. That was a rough one. Anyway, we'll get into that in another episode. So Dominic B, hopefully that answers your question. Let's see. Rick, can I ask why he wasn't lifted out on the Cessna that brought up the piston and jug that was brought up from the Caribou? Any of the research I have done doesn't explain that. Damn good question. And Carl covers it in the book because I believe Carl was there when the Caribou needed to have that cylinder replaced. I know Lawrence Dodds was there. So guy by the name of Niles Jensen. Niles Jensen. He was the pilot of that Cessna that flew that cylinder up there for the Caribou. And he only stayed for about a half hour. I think it was Vernon who asked Niles, hey, can you take Rick back? He's in a bad way. And Niles said, absolutely, sure, no problem. You know, he wasn't concerned at all about getting off the ground because the air was cold, the air was dense, no problems. According to the book, I think Rick actually said no. But I do believe that if they would have forced him on the plane, he would have gone. So, Gavin, I hope that answers your question. That's the way Carl Hoffman addressed it in the book. I have no way of verifying that other than maybe if I had an opportunity to talk to Vernon Rich again, I might be able to confirm that. But yeah, so Rick actually had an opportunity to fly out of there. He was already in a bad way, and he had an opportunity to get on that Cessna, and he did not, or they did not put him on there, which is incredibly unfortunate. So, all right, moving on. Let's see. Ronald, I remember the Nova special about this plane years ago. Yeah, me too. Was there ever a way to disassemble the plane and get it out that way? I did a Q&A about the Kee Bird about 2 weeks ago. Did that on a Friday afternoon, 2 p.m. A lot of you guys tuned in, but some of you couldn't. That's why I'm doing it on a Thursday night. Maybe this will be more convenient for some of you. We talked about that. I am actually going to talk about it again because I need to make some corrections. A lot of the information that I put out there, on one hand, I could say it was wrong, but it wasn't really wrong. I was reading some emails from Gary Larkins, and there's actually a better way to explain it. So we're going to get into that. But if you want, we touched on that for the first Q&A. Check that out, Ronald. Let's see. Operationally, why was the APU left on? Oh boy. My understanding is the APU was primarily used to provide enough AC power to turn over the engines only. That is correct. The APU. I've been thinking about what videos I should be making after I finish the reviews of Frozen in Time and Treasure on the Humboldt Glacier. I've done part 2 on each one. I need to finish those up. After that, maybe you guys can tell me what you want. A video dedicated to the Caribou, a video dedicated to the Dozer, a video dedicated to the APU, because that's got a crazy story. I had another idea. Oh, how about a video dedicated to the 1993 expedition? I've got all kinds of footage. Bob Vanderveen gave me some too of the 1993 expedition, which wasn't even mentioned in the 2 documentaries. So let me know in the comments what you guys want to see. Maybe I'll do a maybe I'll do a poll. That's the word I'm trying. Maybe I'll do a poll and see what you guys decide. Let's see. Hold on a second here. And bear with me a second. Okay, let's see. So hopefully, let me try and answer this as simply as possible. Bob Vanderveen was in the back of the Kee Bird with the APU. Okay, his job, when I was talking to Bob, his job was to pay attention to the back of the 4 engines. I don't believe Bob had a headset on, but his job was to monitor the back of all 4 engines to see if there was any smoke, any fire. The APU, if I remember correctly, and we'll have Bob on here. He can tell the story himself, but just real quick to answer McQuay 7447, the APU was left on because Daryl, as I understand it, was only supposed to be moving the plane from point A to point B. It was the first time the plane was going to be moved. Matt Jackson still had his tools on board. He was supposed to simply move the plane to the edge of the lake, and they were going to unload all kinds of equipment. So they left the APU on because, as you say in your question here, why was the APU left on for takeoff? He wasn't supposed to take off. At least that's what I've heard from several people. Lawrence Dodds, Bob Vanderveen, Vernon Rich, Matt Jackson. They all say he was not supposed to take off. If you look in the video, the ladder is down. There were so many things that indicated that he was not supposed to take off. So yeah, I hope that, and we'll dig into that more on another video. Let's see. Yeah, no, Gavin, I totally understood what you were getting at. Like I said, the local guy in Thule, why didn't you fly Rick out? Niles Jurgens, Niles Jensen, something, that was his name, something like that. Part of the, so Thule Air Force Base had no planes assigned to it at all, but yet there was a Cessna plane that was part of a flying club. And that is how they got the cylinder up to replace the bad cylinder on the Caribou. That's a whole story in and of itself. Let's see. McQuay 747. Did Daryl just plan to start up the engines and taxi? Okay, we talked about this a little bit ago. Start up the engines and taxi to takeoff. Yes, as it's my understanding that is the case. Why wasn't a suitable surface prepped for the taxi and takeoff run, or at the very least the B29 towed to the beginning of the runway? Yeah, good question. Well, to answer your first question, yeah, the plan was to just start up the engines and taxi to takeoff. That was the plan. A suitable surface, actually, it was about as good as it could get. They kept going up and down the runway with the grader to try and flatten it out, but it was so cold, so snowy that mounds kept forming. But the runway was still pretty good, but the path to get from where they were working on the plane to the runway was bumpy as hell. And you can kind of see also when the engines gear up, all 4 engines are running, you'll see the plane collapse on its nose gear. The shocks were, and the struts were just totally shot. There was no fluid in them, so it was just bumpy as hell. I'm getting off track here. I apologize. Let's see. Gavin says, I believe Daryl had already sold the aircraft. Yes, he did have a buyer. As I understand it, he had a buyer, and he eager to deliver it. Yeah, that's the understatement of the year. He had a buyer for the plane, but everything, all the investment, the money came out of Daryl's pocket, as I understand it. So the plane couldn't be sold until I think he either got it. I think getting it to Thule wasn't enough. I think he had to get it on North American soil, possibly. So once he crossed into Canada, or maybe once he got it back to the States, but getting it to Thule wasn't good enough. So yeah, but he did have a buyer, and he was set to make millions, which is why he made this investment. let's see, Gavin again. My guess is that although Rick couldn't do any more work, he was. Yeah. Well, I think that was probably in Rick's mind why he didn't want to get on that Cessna. He wanted to still provide advice. He did not want to be taken off and feel like he was leaving people like Cecilio and Vernon Rich behind. So that's all conjecture, right? But it's a pretty solid guess. How about the Spanish guy working with Rick, Cecilio? I have been looking for that guy for years. You know, I've been able to get in touch with so many different people. I can't find him. I don't know what nationality is. I've tried so many different things. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know what nationality is. I know that he primarily spoke Spanish. He did speak some English, but so he wasn't a Native American, but or he wasn't U.S. born. If anyone, or Cecilia, if you're watching this, you know, I'd love to talk to you. I would be fascinated about, you know, what he has to say. Boy, you guys got all kinds of great comments. Let's see. Oh, no need to call me Mr. Stano. Ken's fine. I appreciate that though. But yeah, you don't need to call me that. Let's see. I'm just glad you guys are excited about this as I am. And trust me, I've got a lot more stuff to talk about here, but I want to get to some of your questions. This is the one that we're going to tackle next. And again, let me get my image out of the way. 2 comments here. UK Globo Plebe. Wonder what happened to the original engines. Did Daryl fly them back to Thule? Along the same lines, J Grant 4060 makes the comment, the original motors are for sale on Facebook Marketplace. Let's tackle the first one. UK Globo Plebe. Wonder what happened. Well, here, hold on a second. One more time. Wonder what happened to the original engines. Did Daryl fly them back to Thule? At least in Treasure of the Humboldt Glacier, the British version of the documentary, they clearly state that all 4 engines, once they're removed from the Kee Bird, are going to be flown back to Thule and sold to help defray the cost of the expedition. I believe, actually, I'm not 100% sure if they said the same thing in Frozen in Time, B29 Frozen in Time, in the NOAA documentary. But that was the plan. And those engines actually were flown back to Thule. Obviously, the engines that were flown up there, the rebuilt radials that were flown up there, they're still up there. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit. Now, to J Grant 4060. The original motors are for sale on Marketplace, Facebook Marketplace. This is what I found. And many of you had made these comments on several of the videos that 2 of the Kee Bird engines are for sale on Facebook Marketplace. So check this out. Well, I mean, that sure. So these are the images that you can find of supposedly these 2 Kee Bird engines that are for sale. This is a location down in Texas. Here's another image. And it looks like they're just sitting in this, it almost looks like an auction yard for utility equipment, construction equipment. And here's another one. Side view. Now this is where it gets interesting. Check this out. With these engines, I mean, when I saw this, I was just like, what? So apparently each engine comes with a certificate of authenticity issued by the Commemorative Air Force. As I understand it, the Commemorative Air Force ended up with these engines. I don't know if they bought them. I don't know if they were given to them. So it says here, each of these says removed in 1994, sold to the Commemorative Air Force. Specifically the B29 B24 squadron, which so that's the squadron that flies Fifi and The Diamonds B-24. What the heck is that thing? What's that plane called? I saw it when they were here in Minnesota, when they were at Rochester. I apologize, guys. I forget the name of the B-24, but it's the same commemorative Air Force squadron that flies Fifi, the B-29, operated by the commemorative Air Force. So apparently the commemorative Air Force ended up with those two engines, possibly purchased them. I'm not sure. For whatever reason, didn't use them. Don't know why. Now, I will tell you, the engines that Daryl went up there with did, as I understand it, did not have turbochargers. These engines did. So you would think, okay, well, yeah, Fifi, Doc, the other B-29 operated by Friends of Doc, would want these engines. Apparently they're sitting in some salvage yard in Texas. So that's the answer that I have. If anyone could verify that, I don't know, send me an email, whatever. You go on Facebook Marketplace, you will not find this posting anymore. I had to do some digging to get this, and several people made some comments on several of my videos with the link for this as well. I think it might have been on Reddit. Let's see here. I'm sorry, my comments reset. I want to go to some of your questions. Very interested to know what Rick's daughter has to say, hard as that part is. Yeah, Haley was, you know, a little bit of that story. So obviously in trying to learn more about Rick, and I had talked to, I think it was after I talked to Carl Hoffman and Vernon Rich, they said, well, you should talk to Rick's wife. And I believe her name was Tracy. Tammy or Tracy. It started with a T. Anyway, it's like, okay. So I started looking for her, and I say was because she passed away. She had passed away like a couple of months before I started looking for her. So the timing was terrible, but I was able to get in touch with Rick's daughter, Haley, and she was very generous to do a Zoom call with me and talk to her for, I don't know, maybe about an hour and a half. She lives out in Colorado. And that got me. That was in 2022 when I was gathering all this stuff up. And after I talked to Haley, I just stopped because I clearly did not know what the hell I was doing. When you talk to anybody that has lost a father, you know, it can hit you pretty hard. And I was approaching the whole story. You know, I'm a fan, I'm a fanatic about the Kee Bird, but I'm talking to somebody that lost their dad, and she, at the time, she was still pissed, upset, angry, rightly so. And it shook me, made me realize it's like, well, I'm actually messing with people's lives here. And yeah, so one of these days, anyway, moving on. Sorry, guys. Okay. Thanks for the question, Todd. Appreciate that. All right. Next question from Big Tar Heel Fan. Another great name. Here we go. Do you know what happened to the Bulldozer? Hell yeah, I know what happened to the Bulldozer, and a lot of you guys do too. It's so, like I said at the beginning, I'd like to make a dedicated video, and let me know what you want to see. Do you want to hear about the Caribou? Do you want to hear about the Huey helicopter? Do you want to hear about the Bulldozer? Do you want to hear about the Bulldozer? There's so many different subjects. Do you want to hear about the APU? There's so many different subjects that we could dig into. And as long as you guys are interested, I'm interested. As far as I'm concerned, I'm not going to stop until no one watches anymore, you know, and then I'll move on to some other subjects. By the way, I should probably say my name's Ken from the YouTube channel History X. I'll throw this on here. So the YouTube channel started in February of 21, and I love making World War II related content, other aspects of history I find fascinating. So I immediately dove in and I forgot to introduce myself. So that's who I am. Check out History X. Check out my YouTube channel. Hopefully you'll like some of the other stuff that I put out there. Let's see here. And also, you know, please like and subscribe. You know, if you're enjoying these Kee Bird videos, hit like, subscribe. Like I said, part 3 is going to be coming out as a review of the documentaries. And when I dig into some of these other pieces of the story, or I have people like Bob Vanderveen on, you know, you guys will be notified when we're going to do that. All right, the Dozer. And going back to this great question here, do you know what happened to the Bulldozer? And I want to finish reading that. Let me get my image out of the way here. Do you know what happened to the Bulldozer? I wonder if it sank to the bottom of the lake or what. I'm thinking it was still there when Gary Larkins went to clean up the mess. We talked about that in the previous Q&A. Gary Larkins had to go up and clean up Daryl's mess. Otherwise, the Danish government weren't going to grant his other permits to recover other planes. So he goes on to say, I wonder if it sank to the bottom of the lake or what. I'm thinking it was still there when Gary Larkins went to clean up the mess, but not sure. I'm from an equipment family, and like you, am really obsessed with everything about this documentary. I know, right? Who isn't? All right. So the Dozer. And so this is an image of the Dozer stacked up on cribbing. I'm pretty sure it's a John Deere. I'm pretty sure I know what make and model it is. I don't necessarily know what year. Obviously, it's a John Deere, so that's the make. And I think the model is a 350. John Deere 350. But I need to do some more research. I'm in touch with some other people that might be able to help me identify this thing. Here it is sitting in the caribou. Here it is. I mean, we all know this scene, right? Where he pulls the B29 out of the lake using the Dozer. So I mean, yeah, we're all obsessed. You guys know all this stuff already. So okay, so here's the deal. Going back to Gary Larkins. And this is an image that I got from Gary Larkins. So Daryl, I love this story so much, but part of it just makes you shake your head. So when the Kee Bird burns to the ground, Daryl and the guys gather everything up and stuff it under one of the wings of the Kee Bird, and then they leave. So Gary Larkins, the Danish government, sends him a fax and says, hey, before you go on your next expedition, you got to clean up your mess. And Gary Larkins going, what mess? You know, because keep in mind, he was forced out by Daryl. Gary Larkins had all the permits. Gary Larkins had everything. Daryl never transferred the permits into his name. He left them in Gary Larkins' name. So the Danish government said, hey, Gary, you got to go up and clean up your mess. So what choice did Gary Larkins have? So he went up to the Kee Bird site, fired up the Dozer. Apparently it started right up, and had to pull everything off the lake and get it onto dry land. Get it into a suitable situation where any kind of environmental impact would be minimized. All right. So there's the Dozer here. This is the way Gary found it, sitting under the wing. This, oh boy. Check out this satellite view. Okay. This is where Gary left it. So this is a satellite image. Oh, well, I think this one, this might have been a more recent one from 2025. So the lake, the edge of the lake has moved, okay? But when Gary moved, relocated everything, he left the Kee Bird here. Now look straight up. Check this out. I think that's the dozer right there. Hold that thought. In 2014, a group, it was some type of exploratory group. They weren't up there for the Kee Bird. They were actually up there for something else. But they, on one of their helicopter runs, they diverted to the Kee Bird site to check it out. This is in 2014. And they found the dozer. And so this is a picture of them sitting in it. And then just 2 months ago, it was mid-July 2025. So 3 months ago. July, August. Yeah, 3 months ago. My mind's going. 3 months ago, these guys were there. Now, who the hell are these guys? They flew 2 R-66 helicopters over from England and to take a tour to just fly around Greenland. Okay. And among the many sites that they were checking out in Greenland, they wanted to get to the Kee Bird site. So they made it to the Kee Bird site. Here's one of the R-66 helicopters. There were 2 of them. And many of you, well, several of you, I should say, have made comments in the videos mentioning this trip. One gentleman in particular, I apologize. I think he made 2 different comments, and they kept automatically being taken down because I don't allow any kind of AI imagery to appear or be linked to my channel. And they did something in one of their videos where they did some AI generated stuff. They sell helicopters. That's what they do. They aren't explorers or anything like that. They sell helicopters, and some of their stuff was AI generated. I don't think it was even connected to this, but because it had that AI generated stuff, it got automatically deleted. Anyway, so here they are, mid-July, sitting on the dozer, and close-up picture right here. Here's a name I recognize from Museum Ship Mafia. Amnuk, nice to have you join us. I recognize that name. Cool, man. Good to have you here. So anyway, here's the dozer. And you can look at, this is what it looked like in the mid-1990s, 1994. And now all weathered, here, take a look at the John Deere name on the side of the dozer hood, and then take a look now. It's all faded. It's all faded. I think, as I understand it, when Gary, I traded emails with Gary Larkins. When he was done using the dozer, he slashed the radiator hose just like Vernon Rich did after the first season they were up there, so that the block wouldn't freeze. I have a feeling this thing is going to start right up. If anyone goes up there with a new radiator hose and some coolant, I have a feeling this thing will start right up. So anyway, yes, the short answer is yes, we do know what happened to the dozer. It's sitting right where Gary Larkins left it. And we verified it, or they verified it, I should say, as recently as 3 months ago. Thank you, Mark. That was going to drive me nuts. The name of that B-24 that's operated by the Commemorative Air Force and the same squadron as Fifi, Diamond Lil. That was going to drive me crazy. Had an opportunity to see both of those planes when they came to Rochester. I live in Minneapolis. I drove an hour south to check them out in Rochester. Great tour. Strongly recommend anyone to check out the Commemorative Air Force. But thank you, Mark, for reminding me, because that was going to drive me nuts. Amnuk has a link for a Caribou flight manual. Hell yeah. Who wouldn't want to see that? Apparently, it's interesting. Apparently Roger made a yeah, it was in the Nova documentary. Yeah, it wasn't frozen in time. Roger made a reference to how he was reading the flight manual before the expedition, and that's how when they got the indicator, possibly an engine fire, that you might not see any smoke, and that was because Roger had read the manual. Well, it turns out that the indicator was faulty. But yeah, Amnuck, if you've got a Caribou flight manual, hell, that'd be a great video. I'd love to check that out. Why not? Let's see. Who wouldn't want to go up there? Especially when, so Neb's Garage, especially when you see these guys up there in these R66s. They took 2 R66s, or heck, look at this picture here. I don't know what, that was part of some type of a resource expedition, but clearly helicopters can be chartered to get up there. And yeah, I would love to get up there. In talking to Vernon Rich, who had a large part to play in the expedition, he said, yeah, I mean, I'll show you where all the stuff's hidden. We get up there. I mean, think of the tour that he could give us. It would be fascinating. All right. Before I move on, see if I can you tell us what happened to the 50s, the 50 caliber guns, and if a switcheroo of the props was done after the fire? Yes and no. I know the 50 caliber guns were removed because, well, it's all about weight, right? So if they're going to fly the plane out of there, if they're going to fly the Kee Bird out of there, Bob Vanderveen was telling me they were pulling all kinds of flooring out of the flight deck. I mean, they were pulling all kinds of stuff out to make it as light as possible. We all know the bomb bay doors were removed. The 50 calibers, and there were 10 of them, they were also removed. However, I don't know what happened to them. I don't recall, in talking to the guys, and it would have to be from that 1994, the first season, if you want to call it that we see in the documentary. It would have had to have been during then. If they talked about what happened to the 50 caliber machine guns, I don't remember. But I got to assume if they're taking the engines back, right? I mean, if they're taking the original engines back, why wouldn't they take the 50 calibers back too? The only thing that makes me pause is that Thule might have said no weapons. We don't want anything. We don't want any weapons on the base. And so what does that mean? Well, if that's the case, then that means the 50 calibers are still up there, buried somewhere. And if a switcheroo of the props was done after the fire, that I can't talk about. And the answer to that is no. By the way, ask yourself, where are the original propeller blades? So I heard from 2 different people, one of the Nova guys and one of the expedition members. The propeller blades are buried up there too. The original propeller blades are buried up there. So think about that. How cool would it be to find those? Anyway, let's see. So you know what? I'm going to dig into this next question because Paper Closet, I think this is going to answer your question or part of it. Okay. So we talked about the Dozer, and RDMG Win asked the question, and Paper Closet, talks about the props. Whatever happened to the engines, props, etc. on the Kee Bird? Okay. Where do I begin? Well, you know what? Okay. Here, let's just dive in. We all know, we've all seen imagery like this, right? Planes burning to the ground. I think this is Thad Doolin right here, the Commander of Air Force flight engineer, checking things out. But we've all seen these images. The engines, nice straight propeller blades, definitely look like they can be reused to me, right? Well, as we talked about earlier, after Daryl and the guys left Gary Larkins was forced to go up there and clean up Daryl's mess, get the Kee Bird off of the lake, minimize the environmental impact. He had a lot of work to do. And in doing that, because he had pending permits to go get, I think he was going after the B29 My Gal Sal, also in Greenland. Gary Larkins had recovered or been part of the, he'd been part of the effort to recover Glacier Girl, go down 280 feet into the ice and get the P-38 Glacier Girl up there. So he had a long history of aircraft recovery out of Greenland. He couldn't afford to screw it up. So he had to go up there and it was money out of his own pocket. He had to go up there and clean up Daryl's mess. So here is a picture. Here is a satellite, not a satellite image. Here is a aerial photograph of the Kee Bird all pushed together, everything all pushed together and sitting on the edge of the lake. Obviously, this is snow covered, but you can see here, if you look up here, this was so the Danes, they had like a Gulf Stream. They would fly a Gulf Stream over the site to keep an eye on Daryl. And this isn't a Gulf, that's not a silhouette of a Gulf Stream, but it kind of looks like it might be, I don't know. If any of you guys have a guess, let me know, but that doesn't look like a Gulf Stream. Anyway, so they were constantly flying overhead. And so these images would come out from time to time. Take a look at this. I'm not 100% sure. I think this might be from 2009. So to answer your question, was there a switcheroo that occurred with the engines and propeller blades? And the answer is no. And I'm gonna tell you why. On the right-hand side, you'll see 2 engines, propeller blades. On the left-hand side, look, no engines, no propeller blades, right? Let's take a look at some photos from that 2014, the group that went up there in 2014 in the red helicopter. Engines on the left wing, okay? So these engines right here, let's get a closer look. And here they are. Okay, now, look. Bent propeller blades, okay? What the heck happened? In this picture here, if they're straight, okay, and then all of a sudden, in this picture, they're bent up, did the propeller blades get switched? And the answer to that is no, because going back, Gary Larkins had to just get this thing off the lake. And in that process, everything got wrecked. It got wrecked. It was already wrecked, right? But even more so than it was after Daryl and the crew left. Again, another image from 2014. Now, these are the engines and props on the left wing, but look in the background. Okay, look in the background. You can see 2 propeller blades sticking up. Okay, keep that in mind. Now, remember, a group went up in 2 R-66 helicopters middle of July. This is imagery taken from that trip. Now you can see there's some ice on the water, but definitely it's not frozen over. So no one could walk out there, but the helicopters could fly overhead. Now, so here is what the Kee Bird looks like now. Going back to this image here, you can see, the wing's pretty much intact, but some of the damage visible from Gary Larkins rearranging things, the elevators here, the fuselage is pointing up here, but then look at how things have deteriorated. Now look at this aileron, the right aileron here, all shredded up. And looking at this image here, you'd say, well, what happened to the engines on the right wing, on the starboard wing? No engines, no propellers. What the hell? But take a closer look. And I'm gonna refer you back to What's a good picture to go to? I'm going to refer you back to oh, do I not have it? I thought I did. Not here. That's on the left wing, not there. Oh, sorry guys, I thought I had it for you. Okay, so you look in this image here, no engines, no propellers. Okay, but if you look in this image here, look at what you got sticking out of the water right here. That is the tip of a propeller blade. So in the process of Gary Larkins moving everything off the lake, these engines and props essentially were ripped off of the right wing. They're still there. They don't look like they're there, but they're there. And, you know, so at first glance, you can say, well, somebody removed two engines and propellers, but no, actually they're there. They're just under the water. And here is one of the propeller blades still attached to one of the radial engines sticking out of the water. Actually, you know what? I did have a picture, because you look here and you can see in the background, obviously the water level is not as high. You know, keep it like, look at where the nose gear wheels are and take a look at this propeller blade right here. Keep that in mind. So when you go into this picture here, there's the nose gear and there is the tip of that propeller blade. So back in 2014, engines and props were still there. Water levels higher in 2025, but there's still evidence that those engines and props are still there. So going back to RDMG wins question, I hope that answered it. Whatever happened to the engine, props, etc. on the Kee Bird? I hope that answered your question. And if it's not obvious, I've been scrutinizing these videos. I've been scrutinizing these images. You know, I've been reading your comments because so many of you guys are obsessed like I am. So, yeah, I mean, so that is the that's the conclusions, I should say. Those are the conclusions that I've drawn to help answer your question. Let's see what you got. Daryl should have told Vernon Rich to turn the APU off for safety. You know, yeah, I've had several hours of conversations with Bob Vanderveen, who was back there with the APU, and we will have him on to tell his story. Again, like we started off this particular live broadcast saying, it's like Daryl was not supposed to take off. So the plan for takeoff, which would have included shutting down the APU, that just wasn't in the cards. It wasn't on the list of things to do. And Bob has, you know, tremendous, I mean, the description of how violent the shaking was of the plane. No one expected Daryl to move the plane like that at all. Anyway, that's a story for another time. Amnuk, I'm guessing that since Gary Larkins had to clean up Daryl's mess, he's not very keen on doing a future project. Well, that's not going to happen because Daryl's dead. You know, but it's interesting when you dig into Gary's emails that he sent me, and I should tell you, Gary Larkins actually lost his ability to speak when he was pursuing another plane. I think it was in Burma, and he was hit with a virus, so he doesn't have the ability to speak anymore. But he does. I mean, his emails are incredibly detailed and they're fascinating. And you know, it doesn't sound to me like he holds any ill will against Daryl for trying. Maybe he holds ill will for some of the ways Daryl did the things that he did, but not for trying. And, you know, it's sad. Anybody is sad. We're all sad to see a B29 like this destroyed. But yeah, from Gary's emails, I never get the impression that he didn't fault Daryl for trying. Let's see here. Dick Trickles. After the NASCAR driver? That's a great name. The engines are worthless. Well, yes and no. I mean, there's always value to somebody. You know, you just have to, if you're talking about the engines that are still up there, you have to look at the cost. What's it going to cost to get those engines out of there? You've got to charter either a heavy lift helicopter or some type of plane, because you're not going to get those into a Twin Otter. So it's got to be some type of cargo plane. And, you know, now all of a sudden the cost starts mounting, and, you know, so maybe from that perspective, maybe you're right. You know, maybe the engines are worthless because it's just too damn costly to get them back. Is the gantry crane they use still there? I don't know, but I want to find out. You know, the thing's painted gray, and unlike a yellow bulldozer, the satellite imagery isn't going to reveal it. So I don't know if the gantry crane that Rick designed is still up there. McQuay 740. Okay, so you think that was a P3 Orion? That would actually make sense. And I'm going to go back to that picture. That would actually make sense, and I'll tell you why. Carl Hoffman, who wrote the book Hunting Warbirds, and I keep mentioning this book in all my videos because it's fascinating. If you guys are fascinated with the Kee Bird, I strongly recommend you checking out Carl's book. It was written, well, quite a while ago, but before Carl Hoffman was involved in the Kee Bird expedition, he was actually up there. I think he was writing an article for Smithsonian Magazine. I think so. And he was on board an Orion. Like he was like tracking the crew, right? You know, a day in the life kind of thing. And the crew said, "Hey, you want to go see a cool plane?" And they actually flew over the Kee Bird site in a P3 Orion. And so when you say this, you know, is a P3 Orion, I think you could definitely be right, because that's what Carl Hoffman was on when he flew over the Kee Bird. Let's see here. Let's go to some of your other questions before we move on to another one. If he applied for and was granted a ferry permit, he could be exempt from it being fully legal and airworthy. Good point. You know, you hear about, I mean, me being a pilot, you know, you hear about aircraft getting ferried for any number of reasons from point A to point B without being deemed 100% airworthy. You know, get it from point A to point B to get it repaired, to get the kind of maintenance, maybe an inspection. You have to get a ferry permit if your 24-month inspection has expired, right? Yeah. So if you're behind on that, you have to get a ferry permit if you want to transfer it to have a mechanic check it out. Matter of fact, the guy that had the hangar next to me was running into that. I forget why. Oh, because the mechanic at our airfield, I think he was sick or away on holiday. And well, anyway, so yeah, ferry permits. Yeah, absolutely right. They don't have to be 100% legal and airworthy. Thank you, Gavin, for saying that. Let's see. Nate D, I'm surprised that the FAA didn't suspend Daryl's pilot's license for not doing the proper. That's funny. I mean, no joking. That second sentence isn't a joke. It could have gotten someone badly hurt or killed. Absolutely. I mean, you know, Bob Vanderveen tells the story. I mean, he literally was thrown around in that fuselage. Thad Doolin, when the plane was on fire, Thad Doolin's a big guy. He was the flight engineer from the Commemorative Air Force. He barely made it out. So yeah, plenty of people badly hurt or killed. You just got to understand the FAA had no jurisdiction over Greenland. Dick also mentions that it was a P3. Yeah, thanks, guys. I appreciate you jumping in and helping me out there. So yeah, McQuay 740. Yeah, good luck getting on an Air Force base with 50 cals and live ammo. Yeah, I don't really. I mean, that's a guess. I'm gonna have to double check with the guys. Vernon Rich would know. Bob Vanderveen would know. I mean, they would know. I just don't recall. I don't recall that being one of my questions for some strange reason. So I definitely dropped the ball there, right? You guys can give me hell for that one. But yeah, maybe they buried them. I know the original propeller blades are buried up there. So why wouldn't the guns be buried up there too? I mean, yeah. How much did Nova want to release the unedited footage of the Kee Bird? Must be hundreds of hours of lost footage. Okay. I wasn't going to get into this, but there were some questions and comments made. I think it was on the last video, part 2 of my review of the British version of the documentary. If you guys haven't checked that out, or maybe you weren't aware, there was actually another version of the documentary. We all know B29 Frozen in Time. That's what got us on it. But there was a second version that actually came out before the Nova version. I posted the complete video on History X. It's not monetized, but I wanted to make sure that you guys were aware of it because it includes so much additional information. And then I've done a part 1 and part 2 reviewing that documentary. So check it out if you haven't seen it. I mean, you won't believe the additional footage that is there. But how much did Nova want to release the unedited footage? So Nova is a program of WGBH, the PBS station in Boston. And Paula Apsell, who is the lead, or was at the time, she's retired. She was the lead producer of Nova. And I like I said at the start of this broadcast, I talked to her. Fascinating woman, fascinating. Well, she basically said, yes, of course there's additional footage. You know, the Nova crew took hours and hours. Well, forget about, there was no digital camera, right? So it was all on film. Hundreds and hundreds of pounds of film. Hundreds and hundreds of pounds of film that they recorded while they were up there. And of course, not all of that can make it into a 55-minute documentary. So, well, what happened to the rest of it? And after I talked to Paula Apsell, I contacted WGBH in Boston. And they said, yeah, we know where it is. And I actually talked to one of their archives guys. I think his name was Jim. He was very open. He said, yeah, I know where it is. I don't know what's there. I don't know what we have. But yeah, we'd be happy to. What it boils down to is, yeah, we'd be happy to give you access to it for a price. And I forget the price I think it was per 15 minutes was, I mean, ridiculous, astronomical. So you asked the question, how much did Nova want to release the unedited footage of the Kee Bird? How much did Nova want to release it? Well, when they tell me that it's going to cost hundreds and hundreds of dollars per 15 minutes, they didn't want to release it at all. Not at all. Now, I will say about a month ago, they reposted the B29 Frozen in Time documentary on YouTube. A little higher quality, a little better resolution, and I think it already has 500,000 views. Matter of fact, probably a lot of you guys have seen it. But yeah, I tried to get them to let me look at it. At least let me see what's there, and that went nowhere. But at the time, I will say the YouTube channel back then, that would have been in 2022, was, with the help of you guys, over 180,000 subscribers now. Maybe it'd be a different story, but back then, you're talking about a tiny little YouTube channel. They didn't care. They did not care. But thanks for the question. Let's see. Amnuk, the Air Force may have sent someone to retrieve the 50s. Yeah, maybe. You'd like to think so, right? The 50 cals. I'm sure the guns went to Julie. Oh, Thule. I'm sure the guns went to Thule and the Air Force has them. Yeah, I don't know. I don't really know if an Air Force base would allow them to show up there, to be brought on base. I really have no idea. Daryl broke all kinds of other rules at the base. Why not that one, right? But you have to look at the notion of, or the idea of, the original engines. He was bringing the original engines back to sell them to defray the cost of the expedition. What's selling a handful of 50 caliber machine guns going to do? Nothing at the time. Now they're probably worth something, but at the time they're probably worthless. So that Caribou had problems, putting stuff on there that's not going to help them. Like the propeller blades are still up there. That's not going to help them. So I'll bet the 50 calibers. I think some of you guys are right. I'm sure they're probably still up there, buried. Let's see. on the first expedition to see Kee Bird, they started, well, the engine on the left outboard engine. So is that number one? That might be number one. I don't know. Or do they start on the right side? Help me out there, guys. There's no reason why if you soak the cylinders, fresh battery. Yeah. I brought, my grandfather had a 1957 BMW Izetta that hadn't been started in 54 years. He's since passed away, but you know, all we did was, you know, throw some Marvel mystery oil and some penetrating lube in the cylinder along with some other stuff. But I mean, it started right up, you know. No reason why if you soak the cylinders, I can't agree with that more. Well, that's literally how they did it in 1993. We got to do a video about the 1993 expedition. All right. I want to get on to the last question that I wanted to answer for you guys. And if you guys have questions, email address is ken@historyxchannel.com. Throw your questions and comments in the comments below all the videos. I do read them, and that's where I come up with some of the stuff. So this is the last thing that I want to touch on for you guys, and I'm already over an hour. I wanted to try and keep it to an hour like we did 2 weeks ago. Unfortunately, you know, I get excited, I get sidetracked, and you know, so I mean, keep me talking about the Kee Bird, and I won't shut up. So the Q&A that we did 2 weeks ago, William asked this question: why didn't they just disassemble the plane in manageable sizes and cart them out in pieces? Matter of fact, I think one of you asked the question earlier. See if I can find that. I thought somebody did. Well, I can't find it. I apologize. If somebody asked that question, I can't find it. But William asked this question 2 weeks ago, and we talked about the fact that there were different variations of the B29 bomber. There was, well, at least an A, B, and a C. I don't think the C ever went into production. But one of the things that it focused on, and Bob Vanderveen helped me with this a lot, was and again, I'm probably going to screw this up. The A, and you see in this image here, let me get myself out of the way. The A had a wing spar that ran all the way through the fuselage. And I think the B, and this is the way I explained it 2 weeks ago. I want to revisit this because I got part of it wrong, or there's more information I can put out there with the help of Gary Larkins. So you can see in this image here, the spar goes all the way across as it's being lowered into the fuselage. Think about disassembling that in the middle of the Arctic versus like a PBY Catalina. If you had a middle section and you could unbolt the distal or the outboard portions of the wings, then you might be able to disassemble the plane. I looked at this and I'm going, there's no way. You want to ask the question, right? You totally want to ask the question. Why didn't they just take it apart, put it on a barge, get it back to Thule, you know? So that's how I answered that question. And that was with the help of Bob Vanderveen too, because he's the one that explained that to me and helped me realize that there were different variations of the B29. But then I was going into an email that Gary Larkins had sent me back in 2022. And again, Gary Larkins, aircraft recovery expert. He's kind of like the Indiana Jones when it comes to warbird recovery. Fascinating, fascinating guy. He's the one that originally secured the permits to recover the Kee Bird, and Daryl Greenemeyer eventually forced him out. But before I move on, I just want to show you that Gary was part of the 1993 expedition with, or the trip that Daryl, Gary, Rick Kriege back here, Tommy Hoffman, Ouija Smith, Daryl's dad right here, they all went up there to see, is the B29 Kee Bird salvageable? So Gary Larkins was part of that. And Gary Larkins, generous enough to answer some of my questions, including this one: why didn't they just take it apart? And that actually, now, it's a complex email, But like I said before, Gary can no longer talk. He's lost his voice because, you know, from an attempt to recover a plane, he got a virus, and so his vocal cord, you can't use his vocal cords anymore. So he sent me this email. So bear with me because it's kind of long. I'm going to get myself out of the way. Gary's original plan was, in fact, to disassemble the Kee Bird. This was Gary's plan. Gary in the background. Okay. So he had access to a C-54 sky crane. And if you guys aren't aware of what a sky crane is, I got a picture of it right here. Here's a sky crane. Obviously, it can carry a lot of weight. What is that? Is that an Abrams that it's picking up? I don't even know what kind of tank that is. But this helicopter can carry a lot. Going back to Gary's email, he had access to one. Now, he goes on to say, and this is where I wanted to revisit William's question, okay? Because I don't feel like I was answering it the right way. Gary went on to say that the Kee Bird was what's called an F-13A model B29. The inner wing split at the bomb bay. Okay, all right, that falls in line with what we're talking about here. The inner wing did not, it wasn't in three pieces, it split right here. And it sounds to me like maybe the spar didn't go all the way through, but at least it went into the fuselage. Anyway, going back to Gary's email. By removing all kinds of things, you know, the engine cowling, the flap, landing gear, the sky crane could lift them one at a time. And this was Gary's plan. Okay. So he'd pull the engines and the cowlings off. The nose section could be one load. The bomb base section could be one load. I'm going to pull the comments down so you guys can read this a little bit more clearly. I apologize if the print's a little too small. And the tail section could be one load. And then he would use a Huey to transport their tools and, you know, up there, as well as to bring the small stuff back. Okay. So this using a sky crane that he had access to. Moving on in his email, the sky crane would have needed 2 fuel dumps set up along the way to get from Thule to the Kee Bird. Okay. So you would have needed 2 fuel dumps, and I'm assuming he means loaded. So if the sky crane is carrying a wing from the Kee Bird or carrying engine, you know, whatever, it's got to go slowly. So he would have to have 2 fuel dumps along the way for the sky crane to refuel. That's quite a process. And he had discussed the plan with the Air Force, and they thought that they could get the sky crane up to Thule on a barge that goes up to Thule every year. Now, is that the same thing as the ship that we all know that Daryl had to get he had to get the dozer on, the engines, the tires, all of that? Is that the ship? You know, they had to get 9,500 gallons of 130 low lead refined. That was on the ship. Is that the same thing as the barge that Gary's talking about? I don't know that for sure, but that was the plan that the Air Force said, you know, if you have access to a sky crane, you could put it on the barge and get it up to Thule. So this was Gary's plan. And I find this fascinating. So bear with me. And again, expanding on William's question from 2 weeks ago. William, thanks for the question. We were talking about this quite a bit, and I feel like I was getting part of it wrong. So I dug into Gary's emails, and I wanted to revisit this. So this was Gary's plan. And again, I'll get my image out of the way. His plan was to go up there in one summer and do the disassembly. If it ran over, 2 summers, okay? But that was Gary's plan. Take it all apart. Prep all the components for the lift. And then the following season, get the sky crane up there on that ship or that barge. Get it to Thule and start bringing the sections back to Thule. Now, this is kind of a testament of how Gary appreciated and, you know, valued the assistance of other people, where it could be argued that Daryl did not. And I should put my image here because I want to make sure that these are my opinions, that you guys, you know, I want you to be aware that this is my opinion. But in the interviews that I've had with so many different people at the base, Daryl was not easy to get along with. Boom, boom, boom. He's on a tight schedule. Want to get this done in 3 or 4 weeks. And he would, he didn't care what other people thought. Gary Larkins, different mindset. So in throwing this idea to the Air Force, bring these pieces back. The Barge, which makes sense, the Barge returns to the US empty. Okay. So why not put the pieces that you bring back with the Sky Crane, put those on the Barge and take them back to the US? So they said there would be plenty of room for the Kee Bird and the Sky Crane. But it doesn't just end there. The Air Force then goes on to say, hey, oh, shoot. Let me pull myself out of the way again. Captain Cox, who was so in the documentary, we're all used to seeing Captain Max Dugan. He was one of the logistics. He was one of the logistics commanders there. But Colonel Cox, he was the one that was in charge. And Colonel Cox says, in talking to Gary, he offered, in the event that the Kee Bird had to spend a winter at Thule, one of the gigantic B-52 hangars that were no longer usable. So Thule had a bunch of B-52 hangars that they had built, but as the years went by, they became unusable. This is fascinating. At the base, the colonel offered, hey, you can put the pieces of the Kee Bird in one of the hangars. Why? Keep it out of the wind. Why? Because many of the hangars, they were no longer in use by the Air Force because the floor was sinking. The floors of these hangars were sinking because the permafrost that they were built on was slowly thawing because of the heat, and the floors were collapsing. So Colonel Cox was saying, hey, we've got all these hangars. Of course you can store the pieces of the Kee Bird in there. We aren't using them because there's this huge dip in all of them. So, and this is kind of where it gets a little heartbreaking. The last sentence in Gary's email, he says, I suppose it was just not meant to be. So that was Gary Larkins' plan for the Kee Bird. And that's how he envisioned tackling the whole process. So many of you asked the question, why didn't they just take it apart and fly it out of there? And many of you are probably even saying that tonight. Why, instead of trying to fly it out, why didn't they just take it apart and truck it out of there? I'm sorry. Did I say, why did they not take it apart and fly it out of there? That would have made no sense. Truck it out of there, put it on, somehow transport it via helicopter, some kind of tracked vehicle, get it to a barge, on the shore, whatever. There's so many different things. That was Gary's plan. So I wanted to share that with you guys. I thought it was important for me to add to that part of the conversation what Gary Larkins had shared with me in his email. Let's see. That pretty much wraps up what I wanted to cover with you guys tonight. I appreciate all the great questions you've been emailing to me. Again, ken@historyxchannel.com. You can throw your questions and comments. For the many videos I've done about the Kee Bird, I read them all. I've got more stuff coming. Part 3 will be coming, reviewing Treasure of the Humboldt Glacier, the British version of the documentary, as well as part 3 for Nova's B29 Frozen in Time. I can't get enough of the Kee Bird. And looking at all the great comments you guys have made tonight, it looks like I'm not the only one that's obsessed with this story. So yeah, if you got more questions, keep them coming. I'll try and do another Q&A maybe in another week or so. But you know what? Before we go, let's see what else you got here. Gavin makes a comment. Yeah, Daryl was an aircraft broker. He would buy one plane, sell it, buy a bigger plane, take that money, buy a bigger plane, or maybe buy multiple planes. The Huey helicopter that was used was part of if you want to call it a horse trading deal. He bought 6 Huey helicopters from Norway, the government of Norway, and that's where the one Huey helicopter came from for the Kee Bird expedition. So yeah, that's what Daryl did. Let's see here. Gary would have brought the Kee Bird out somehow, and we would have it intact today. Alex, I can't argue with that. Yeah, I mean, you look at Gary's track record. Gary, he he was part of the expedition to get Glacier Girl, the P-38 out of the Greenland ice. My gal Sal. I mean, the list of warbirds that he has recovered, it's staggering. So, and you obviously it's hindsight being 2020, of course. Yeah, take it apart and get it back. But it certainly sounds like if Gary had access to a Sky Crane helicopter, it certainly sounds like he would have pulled it off. Well, he wasn't going to fly it out of there. So yeah, I agree with you, Alex. Let's see, going through. Yeah, Scott, you make a good point here. I'm gonna let me back my image off. Sky cranes are very expensive to hire. Yeah, they are. And so in Gary's email, when he makes the comment, you know, that he had access to a sky crane that could be dedicated on a barge up to Greenland. Well, I mean, whoever owns that sky crane is being generous, but you know what? Maybe that's all part of the deal that he worked out monetarily wise. I mean, Daryl was going to make millions off the Kee Bird. You know, Gary would have as well if he would have gotten it back. So yeah, I hear you, Scott. Sky cranes are very expensive to hire, and you got to have all these fuel depots set up ahead of time. Yeah, it would have been a huge undertaking. And of course, you also make the comment, still a very big task to disassemble, without a doubt. Without a doubt. All right, guys. That's all I have for you this evening. I appreciate all of the comments, all of the questions. We'll do this again. And, you know, thank you for spending your Thursday night with me. Hopefully, if you were going to watch Pittsburgh play Cincinnati, hopefully you don't mind catching the second half of that game, because that's what I'm going to go look at right now. Anyway, all of you guys have a great evening. I hope I've cleared up a lot of your questions when it comes to the Kee Bird, but don't worry, there's going to be more coming. In the meantime, everyone have a great Thursday night, and we'll talk soon. Bye, everyone.